All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it a minute as people kind of fill in. So don't mind us while we hang out, just, I guess, until 12:03, and then we'll kick it off. All right. We've got a good number of people joining us. Good afternoon. I'm London. I am the current PPRA president, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our first DEI program of this programming year. One of my biggest goals for my presidency was to further the DEI work that PPRA is doing, really make sure that we are a thought leader in the local and regional communication space on DEI, and do as much as we can to kind of work with people to give them what they need and work with other organizations. So this year we started what I think is the first DEI committee that PPRA has ever had, which is led by my wonderful colleague, Sam Biles. And her team worked hard to put together this presentation on equity in public relations. And so thank you so much to all of our panelists, to Exude HR for partnering with us. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. You probably also saw when you registered a link to our DEI survey. We're really looking to see how people feel about DEI in the Philadelphia communications space, your work specifically, and PPRA. We want to know what we can do. We really want your feedback, good, bad, in between. So Sam's going to drop that in the chat. If you can fill that out when you have a moment, it would really help us inform our programs going forward. So before I pitch it back to Sam, I just wanted to plug our upcoming members only happy hour on February 11th. It's really, like, we all miss each other so much, and I wish we could all be in person, but we can't. And so until then, we're doing these virtual happy hours. It's very informal. You bring a drink, you bring some problems at work, or just ideas you have, things you want to talk through, and fellow PPRA members just kind of join together and work through stuff or brainstorm, and they're really great. So you can log on to ppra.net and register there. And then at the end of this, once, we'll send a recording and also a discount to anybody who is attending. If you're interested in joining PPRA, we're going to do a lot more events like this. We have events, on social media, on PR. And if you have any events or speakers that you want to see, I would love to hear it. But I encourage you to take a look at our member benefits and the kinds of things we do if this is something that interests you. So thank you again to all of our speakers. And Sam, I'll give it to you to kick it off.
Thanks, London. So thanks everyone for joining us today. As London mentioned, this is the first event from the DEI Committee for PPRA. And I think with the news of the LA Times report and all the situations and incidents at CBS 3 right here in our backyard in Philadelphia, I think this conversation comes at a much needed time. And this discussion is well needed in terms of our work as PR professionals. So I'm happy and excited to kind of launch this as our first event for the DEI committee, and stay tuned for more events throughout the programming year. So with that said, I'm just gonna go ahead and get it started. I know we have a lot to cover and a lot of questions. So I'm gonna pass it along to Dan Gallagher, who is the Managing Director at Exude Inc. They've been our partner in putting this event together. So I'm gonna go ahead and share it with him.
Thanks so much, Samantha, and really excited to spend the time with everyone today on this important topic. We love to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the differences, the intersection, the history, and the opportunity. And really, we're going to focus on all that today. While we only have an hour, this is meant to be targeted around you, professionals in the PR and communications space. And really, we've divided this into 3 chapters, if you will, our time. The first chapter, we'll hear from Sabrina Harris around the core of equity, and talk about the difference between equity versus diversity versus equality. In the second part, we'll take a look backwards in kind of how we got to today, And we'll bring in two great panelists that we're thrilled and appreciative of their time, Bruce Crawley and Colleen Rooney. Bruce runs his own PR agency here based in Philadelphia. Colleen is the head of corporate communications for Signet Jewelers, and thrilled for you to have time with them as well. And then the third chapter is that we'll really talk about moving forward and opportunities, and we'll really want to connect this to making it really practical and relevant. So some of this will be talking about the macro and the big picture, and some of it will be very narrowly focused on what you could do. And I thought I would take a 45-second story to kind of frame this, because what can you get from an hour and how does it apply? I've been a part of these sessions, as many of you probably have, where you have those moments, right? Those aha moments where you're like, okay, I see what we're talking about here, and I'm now going to see tomorrow an opportunity to try something different. And I remember one time where I was informed after one of these sessions by someone that attended, and they said that it gave them the courage to speak up in a meeting and try to encourage and influence others around the table that were much more tenured and much more senior to start using inclusive pronouns. It was a small and simple act that person took, and it was a step of courage. And the impact that it made across his entire organization was profound. And so as we go through the three chapters of our discussion today, yes, like soak it all in, soak in the learning from Sabrina and the perspectives from Bruce and Colleen, but know that we're also going to focus on what can you start doing differently, more of in today's activities after you hang up from this time together. So with that, I'm going to toss to my colleague, Sabrina Harris, who's going to walk us through our first kind of 20 minutes or so. And we'll be getting some the dialogue going immediately within the chat. And I see a couple already jumping in. So look for us to appease those that love to multitask and listen and type at the same time. So Sabrina?
Right. Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Dan said, my name is Sabrina Harris. Excuse me. I'm a senior HR, senior HR and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant with Exude, Inc. And I appreciate being invited to speak with you today. We're going to go very high level to get started with a quick poll. Leave it open for about a minute. But my question to everyone is, if equality and equity are the same, therefore, if you make all things equal, won't you have racial and gender equity in the workplace? What's your opinion? You strongly agree, disagree, or are you not really sure? So please take a moment to vote. Samantha, when you're ready, you can close the poll. All right, so awesome. So no one agrees that they're the same and it's automatically going to create equity in the workplace by having equality. 3% agree, 73% disagree, and 24% of the group is honest enough to say, hey, I'm not really sure. So let's jump right into it. And why do we start there? Next slide, please, Samantha. Because people use the word equality and equity interchangeably, and they're not the exact same thing, actually. Diversity is everything that makes you unique. What makes Sabrina, Sabrina? It's not limited to my race, my gender identity, education, my experiences, my background, those things, but that's my diversity. Inclusion is the practice of leveraging diversity perspectives to allow each employee within your organization to feel valued, respected, and here's the key thing, able to contribute at their full potential so that they can achieve their personal goals as well as the goals of the organization. Because we know that more inclusive organizations have higher retention rates as well as higher higher business attainment. So what is equity? Equity is about fit. It's about ensuring that everyone gets what they need to be successful. It acknowledges that there are opportunity gaps, that there are lack of access sometimes, and that there are barriers to success. and organizations that focused on not only diversity and inclusion, but equity are working to remove those barriers to success. Next slide, please. So I want to share a quote with you. Dolly Chung, who wrote The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias, says, diversity says we treat everyone the same, regardless of headwinds or tailwinds. Equity says we give people what they need to have the same access and opportunities as others, taking into account the headwinds they face, which may mean that differential treatment for some groups. So what does that mean? That means that we're not all starting out at the same point. We have to acknowledge that there are things that put people behind in the game and that they can't automatically be made up by saying, hey, we're just going to make things equal now. Go ahead, you're going to achieve what you need to achieve. No, there are still tailwinds that are pushing back. Next slide, please. So when we look back, how does inequity show up in public relations? Well, first we need to acknowledge that disparities exist not only in public relations, but in historic impact in healthcare, education, employment, housing, PR, marketing, all those things tied together. That's systematic racism. And those things tied together, because if you can't get a good education, you're likely not to be able to get good employment. Lack of employment or not having employment at a high level, low housing opportunities. Low employment impacts healthcare, all those things tied together. How else does inequity show up? The Mad Men mentality, and I've never seen the show, I'll be first to admit that, but I've heard so many people say it's one of those shows you either love or hate. People love it because it's so wildly funny that they can't imagine those things happen, but then other people hate it because at the same time, imagine if someone didn't have an opportunity to achieve all they could because of negative comments that are made, lack of opportunity within the workplace, not only for underrepresented minorities in the workplace, but for women as well. Inequity also shows up with cultural appropriation, taking on another individual's culture, utilizing it as your own, or utilizing it in an inappropriate manner, which then ties to stereotyping. When we talk about urban, urban doesn't only mean Black, but when urban is only portrayed as Black, that's stereotyping. That's another way that inequity shows up. And then placement of negative ads. I was doing some research and it talked about the fact that negative ads for cigarettes and alcohol were placed 7 times more in inner city and minority communities for Blacks and Hispanics than any other community. And so all of those things tied together lead to inequity in public relations and in marketing. Next slide, please. As we look forward, how can we achieve equity in PR and marketing? Prioritize equity. Each of you has an opportunity to be intentional within your organizations in hiring, promotions, and providing opportunities. So when ads are pitched, again, I did some research and it's like a lot of ad pitching takes place in informal settings, which then leads to bigger opportunities. Make sure that others are included in those opportunities. And when I say others, we're talking about underrepresented minorities as well as women who might not otherwise be included in those conversations. Develop measurable plans. What gets measured gets done. So put a stake in the ground and say that we're going to commit to hiring, to having internship opportunities, to starting mentoring programs. Those things are really important to achieving equity. Change the policies, practices, and procedures in your organization that work to the benefit of some over others. So we know that in some organizations, senior individuals within the organization get the bigger bonuses. Well, if everyone doesn't get to share in the wealth, if you will, and there's no minorities or women who are moving into more senior level positions, then there'll continue to be that disparity in wealth. For those who have privilege, be willing to use your privilege. So I talk about the difference between sponsorship and mentoring a lot with my clients. Mentoring is wonderful and great, and certainly there needs to be opportunities for individuals who are trying to advance their career. But sponsorship is when you're willing to put your name on the line and say, hey, I think we ought to hire this individual, or I support this person getting a promotion. If you happen to be the most senior person in your organization, be willing to use that privilege. Communicate what you're doing both internally and externally. So organizations that are working towards achieving equity, they need to know what you're doing, because they will then want to come to you to partner with you. Likewise, as you work on equity within your organization, your employees will want to stay longer. Give them a reason to want to stay. Hold everyone accountable. This one is so important. No one gets a pass. Oftentimes clients say to me, well, Sabrina, I don't know. We can't find people in a particular area. What are you doing to work on identifying minorities in public relations and marketing? So I mentioned to Samantha as we were waiting to start this call, there's the National Black PR Society. If you're recruiting, are you using them? There's the Philadelphia Black PR Association. Are you using them? And certainly, are you partnering with Samantha, and London right in your own organization to make sure you're bringing in more minorities, more women, and creating an equitable playing field? Decide what your company's legacy will be. There's an organization called Creative Equals. Some of you may be familiar with it. They do an assessment. So it's an opportunity for you to do a self-assessment within your organization to say, hey, are we really working to achieve equity, or are we doing churn and grind by bringing in individuals in, but then they're walking out the door? So there's a leadership commitment called Adland Commits. And if your organization hasn't committed to that, I'd encourage you to take a look at it. It's ad leaders who said, this is not a moment, this is a movement, and we're going to be working on that. Likewise, Time 2, and I didn't have an opportunity to look up a lot of information on that, but Time 2 is the comparable part of the Me Too movement for the PR industry. And so there's the opportunity to sign a pledge to make sure that more women have equitable opportunities to advance within public relations organizations. Because let's face it, women are large parts of the consumer decision-making process, as well as large portions of the PR leadership within organizations as well. So who are you pitching to within an organization if you're a PR company going to work with them? Next slide, please. So I just want to end with a quick video, and Sam's going to tee that up. That again talks about the difference between talks about the difference between equity and equality. Someone's written in the chat that the Black PR Association is not available to individuals outside of the college environment, if I caught all of that. Here, I'll stop here.
So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests, oh, everyone should get the same amount. The problem with that, not everybody's starting out from the same place. So if we're all getting the same amount, but you started out back there and I started out over here, we can get the same amount, but you're still gonna be that far back behind me. It's about giving people the resources and the support they need so that everyone can be on equal footing and then compete on equal footing. Equitable treatment means we all end up at the same place. We're all getting the same.
Thanks, Samantha. There's various depictions of equality and equity. Some of you may have seen the individuals who are watching a baseball game. There's a short individual, medium height individual, and a taller person. They're all on milk crates, the same milk crate. And then when you move to equity, the shorter individual is given multiple milk crates to stand on. And the real challenge is to tear down the fence so that they can all just see straight into the game. There's also the one with the bicycles. So all the bicycles are the same height. They all have two wheels, but you've got a really tall person who's leaning over. You've got a small child who the bike is too big for them. And you have a person in a wheelchair who needs an adapted bike. The key is to give individuals what they need to be successful, because when they're successful, your organization is successful. With that, Dan, I'm going to throw it back to you. People are really chatting in the chat section, and so there's some questions. Someone said there's a great TED Talk on equity I recently came across, and they put it in the chat room, so you can see that.
That was a good setup, Sabrina. That was me. Thank you. I'll send you the quarter later on.
There you go. Someone else mentioned that they had read the book that I mentioned, and so people might want to pull that up.
Yeah, and as you have other resources you're recommending, we all come from different starting points on this topic. So sharing information that you have or resources that you've used for yourself or with others, really, really helpful here. So we're really lucky to have and transition into the second chapter here, where we're going to talk with Bruce and Colleen. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves before we jump into that topic. So Bruce, can I toss to you first, please?
Yes, please. My name is Bruce Crawley. I'm CEO and founder of a company called Millennium 3 Management. It's based in Center City. Well, now 7th and Calla Hill. I guess that's Center City now. but we have been focusing on PR, other kinds of related communications and marketing. I was an ad director when I was on the corporate side at a major bank, and from there went over to the investor relations and PR side of the corporation. Stayed at the bank until I got tired of seeing people laid off for no good reason, through no fault of their own, and I decided I better make my own exit. And so I started the firm, and it's been great. I just got tired of sitting around waiting for the axe to fall on people in a large corporate setting. But there's nothing like being the head of your own firm. So we enjoy that very much. I think the other thing about us that you probably want to know is that we're doing a little bit of philanthropy. My wife and I started a foundation. It's based in Ghana, and we used to distribute bamboo bicycles to kids who used to live in the rural areas and needed to get far distances to arrive at their school. But then we moved about a year ago to distributing computer labs, again, in rural areas of Ghana. And so we enjoy that very much. And you're talking about equity. The problem, we started thinking about moving computer components and monitors into the classrooms and getting teachers to move in and be trained to do the work. And then we found out that none of the schools in the rural areas had broadband. So they had all this equipment, they had monitors. We were able to get our demonstration project up and running, but it's a good example of equity. I mean, you can give people the same equipment, but if they're not situated in the same environment or competitive environments, they can't take advantage. I think it's a very good time for us to have this discussion, especially in the wake of President Biden's executive order on racial equity. We have not had such a strong statement from the top of the White House for as long as I can remember. Barack Obama was a nice guy, but he never did anything like this. This is a really strong statement that's been made, and he's talking about making the issue of equity an all government kind of initiative, and it's going to be managed by the Office of Management and Budget, and it's going to be from top down and everybody in the government, and then expanded out to the private sector will be engaged in creating equity in the business and government space. So I think it's a good time, and we're very fortunate to have had this day after the announcement to have this setting, because lack of equity is an awful thing, and it does damage to the companies that don't take advantage of it. And we're talking about how people move up and get into the industry and into the profession. And we have people who are going to college for marketing and going to university for PR and journalism. But the reality is that if the people at the top of the company don't understand what the advantage is, it still won't work. The issue of equity comes down from the people who believe they need the support or don't believe they need the support. And there have been historical reasons why, especially Black people, talking about Black people at this point, why Black people have not been included in an equitable way in the public relations profession. I was looking at some data and it said that we shouldn't be surprised to learn that in 2018, the Harvard Business Review informed us that PR profession is 87.9% white, 8.3% African American, 2.6% Asian American, and 5.7% Hispanic. In addition, African American representation in the legal profession is at 6.8%. Among physicians, the representation of Blacks is 8.5. Among computer analysts, the representation of Blacks is 9.7, all far exceeding Black representation in managerial positions in public relations, which stands at a paltry 4.3%. So, you got people who want these jobs, who want to apply and come around and go to the HR people and go to the website and do whatever they need to do to make contact. But if it's not the mindset of the top of the corporation, the top of the firm, then we will certainly have problems. So I relate much of that back to the time that I spent in the banking business. I was in the PR department, but only because I had become the ad director, and the company got disenchanted with the person who was the PR director and asked me to take their job. and I really didn't have any interest in doing that. But then I found out that the person who ran the PR function had almost a daily access to the CEO of the company and to people in executive management and people in senior management. And as the advertising director, I had access to all the information related to marketing, but did not have to talk to executive management. And I thought that would be empowering. And I got involved in PR then and never turned back. I went back and got, this is where Temple comes in, went back and got the master's in journalism from Temple. And I thought that I had found my home when I got into that position. And when I started my firm, we do both PR and marketing and advertising. So it's a function of how we determine what our companies need. I look at information that's come out from McKinsey, the consultant firm, and McKinsey says that companies that don't make proper utilization of female in lead management positions and don't make proper utilization of people of color in lead management positions do comparatively worse than companies that do. Right. And I think that that's information that should be printed onto the forehead of most corporate CEOs and heads of companies. They seem not to want to understand that. They pay a lot of money to companies like McKinsey, and McKinsey develops the information, but we really do have to understand how the people who are looking for jobs are going to meet a compatible environment when they go for the job search. That's not happening now. And if it was happening, we wouldn't have the terrible data that we have on the lack of people in PR who happen to be people of color. No problem with women. Women are the largest segment of PR employees and managers, but Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians, not very good at all.
Yeah. Good, great insights there, Bruce. Thank you for that. And it's actually a good segue for us to introduce Colleen. If for those that are participating in this, it was important for us to have both a agency, management, professional services perspective, but also bring in someone that works on the inside in this case of Signet Jewelers. So Colleen, thrilled to have you.
Hey, thanks so much. And I really enjoyed hearing about Bruce, your experience in you know, and owning your own firm and everything. That's exciting. And also in corporate America. I'm the Chief Communications and ESG Officer at Signet Jewelers. Folks mostly know the brands K Jewelers, Jared, Zales, Piercing Pagoda, which is on fire, and 4 others. And I'm the flip of Bruce's coin. I'm having an incredible experience. I found my home in one of the best companies, I think, in all of America, if not the world. We're doing really well with diversity. We can always do much better. Specifically, gender parity has been achieved. We get honored by Bloomberg Global Equality Index. And my boss, Jenna Drosos, is really stepping up our cultural diversity. And so we've just moved to a more purpose-inspired organization. And she's leading that. And it's really inspiring every day to know that we're not really here to sell jewelry. We're here to help change the world. And so for us, what resonates for us is we're here to inspire love. And so we're going to lean in, and I wanted to be a part of this just so I could learn from you all. We're going to lean into the S in ESG. And for those that don't know ESG, it's a relatively new term. It's environmental, societal, and governance. And societal is, I think, where, you know, we're choosing to play, and we're trying to meet good folks like you all so that we can do more and create, you know, not just a safe place in our company, but in all the communities that we serve. And to Sabrina, I loved her presentation. I want her to send it to me, you know, really focus on the E, you know, in DE&I and the equity piece, and be bold enough to, you know, stand against hate of all forms. There's no place for that in the world. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kyle. You know, as we walk through this discussion, I'm going to continue to inject different resources and see some popping on the chat, whether it's research from McKinsey or others. The one I want to use now is a great resource that came out in 2020, Begin Again, written by Eddie Glaude. And I'm going to actually, it's a James Baldwin quote, but we're going to transition into the next chapter really with a quote that's to accept one's past, one's history is not the same thing as drowning in it. It is learning how to use it. So Bruce, I know one of the things in preparing for this, you expressed is really critical to our discussion is the kind of how we got here, right? And kind of that understanding the history. I know you made a couple of points in your intro, but I'm just curious, is there anything else that you feel like it's important to call out to set as groundwork for the discussion that we want to have, which will be the majority of our time around moving forward, and what can we all individually and collectively do?
No, I think that the history of this country and the history that separates PR people, regardless of race, and journalists has been the superiority complex that journalists have had vis-a-vis PR people. And journalists believe, and I believe in many cases rightfully so, that they have ultimate command of language, and they can communicate more effectively than anyone. The problem is that, especially with Black folks, Black people did not have an ability to learn to read and write. It was against the law. And if somebody who was found to have taught them to read or write, they could also be incarcerated. And so we have this lingering set of dynamics, this lingering stereotypes that people of color, especially Black people and perhaps Hispanic people, don't really understand the King's English and don't really know how to communicate effectively and can't represent a corporation as a spokesperson. And so we have ourselves in a situation where people go to school, get degrees in public relations and journalism, and go out into the workplace, and they can get jobs as interns in firms. And then as soon as the internship is up, they're out and often forever. And so the problem is that there's a stereotype still attached to people of color moving into the PR profession. And that's why we have, again, why we have these horrible numbers. and that relates to the history of our country. We have a bifurcated understanding of who understands English and who doesn't. And if you don't do that, you can't survive. The other thing is, coming from that perspective, and this is history too, the people who often make the decision to hire and to work together with people who are PR people are the very top people in the organization. The PR people have access to information, especially if they're writing financial press releases that nobody else in the world has until it is released. And so they've got to trust those people, and they've got to trust that a person of color can handle that information and treat it with the respect that it deserves. And that's not easy to come by with the cultural history that we have in this country.
Yeah, well said. It makes me think of, Colleen, you and I have talked a lot about purpose and values, right? And so when you think backwards, and then maybe we'll use this to pivot to focusing on moving forwards as well. But when you think backwards, the intersection or the even conflict of capitalism and growth values competing against purpose and human values. Anything you would want to share there?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. We all read the Edelman Trust Barometer. I love that body of research. And so we study that along with other consumer trends. And what I'm so happy to see is that there's more recognition that doing the right thing by your own values and for society is also going to create much more value. It's so, it's still growing, but it's so rewarding to see people like Larry Fink and, major investors saying, we're going to judge your company and we're going to judge you based on how sustainable we think you're going to be. And that means you should start doing the right thing right now. And so for us, I can give you a quick, story. Here we are, we're a retailer. We were very scared when COVID hit. We're a $6 billion company, so a nice size, but not a Walmart, or an Amazon. And we had to close our stores out of for safety reasons for our people and our customers. And we made it our mission to just be purpose inspired, to do the right thing, live our values. And that was a tough call, because if all your stores are closed, you're not making any money. And that's a problem. And so we said people first, but we're going to do everything we can for the sustainability of our company. And during the events of this year, here we are worried about our balance sheet, and George Floyd happened. And thank goodness my boss and the rest of the leadership team said, no, we've got to find the money. We got to join it with NAACP. This has got to stop. And then, the Stop Hate for Profit happened, like every other consumer company, we use social media for marketing purposes, but we stopped. And guess what? We're in better shape today than we have ever been in the last decade. The company is doing great. Our employees, their discretionary effort went up 40% because they saw our boss saying, we are against systemic racism of all forms. We will not tolerate hate, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And so it's an incredible case study of, here's a company that didn't have a lot. We were very worried that, about the sustainability of the company, candidly, but here our boss did the right thing. And, I don't think it's coincidental, Dan. I really don't. And so we have so much momentum going into this next phase, because we know we can do it. We have a saying, since we're a diamond retailer, that, pressure makes diamonds. And it sure did. When the pressure was on, you do the right thing, you're going to come out ahead. You really are.
Yeah, really, really insightful. Let's use that to pivot to kind of more looking forward. Bruce, you shared, as we kind of preparing for this redirection of how a voice can be activated, of what PR was and what it's becoming. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think what business is becoming, there's a marketing and advertising specialty now called social purpose marketing, wherein they're trying to relate to the understanding that starting with millennials and certainly still resonating with Gen Zs, those people are looking for whether or not your company has core values that they can believe in. They can buy sneakers from anybody, but if they don't believe in what your company believes in, if they don't think that your company represents the issues that are important to them, they won't buy your sneakers. And it was very evident in a reverse kind of way with Nike, when everybody was running from Colin Kaepernick and the NFL was dumping him, and corporate America said he was a pariah. When Nike put him in their ads, their stock went up, their sales went up monumentally, and he proved that there is an audience out there for people who say there are Adidas out there, there are all kinds of sneaker brands, but that Nike brand is one that relates to Colin Kaepernick, and I believe what Colin Kaepernick believes. And I think going forward, we're going to have more and more of that because, you know, people who are Gen Z are still only 17 to 24 years of age, and they still believe that, and millennials still in the main believe that, and so it's changing. It's not just which company makes the most money. That people don't care as much about that as they used to.
Right. Colin, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I love what Bruce said. And, you know, just to go back to your question on evolution of sort of the function or PR, I see, you know, me and a lot of my peers, we've become not just, you know, public relations, internal communications, but we're also wearing this hat of purpose. And so I've been coined sort of the purpose person inside my organization. And what does that mean? It means we're there to help remind the organization, as Bruce said, you know, actions matter. It's actions and words. And so every decision we make has to have a purpose lens. Otherwise, we're not going to be doing our job, you know, if we don't speak the truth, you know, to power. We have to remind people that actions are what really delivers good communication strategies. And I like that for us because we're all trained to be great storytellers, but often there's been times in my career where I looked at the corporation I was working for and I was like, it's just putting lipstick on a pig.
Right.
I'm grateful I do not have that. You know, it feels good to be a part of something where I can earn a good living and help be the change we want to see in the world with somebody who, with a leader who, if we see a microaggression in our store, we'll say, listen, thank you for coming, but you should shop somewhere else. And so I think that trend's going to continue. More and more of my peers are now wearing both hats, you know, public relations and purpose.
That's great. Let's use that to transition into a couple of questions that are popping up in the chat. Some of these are going to all, and some of these are coming just to the panelists, so you may or may not see all of them. But there's one here that I'd love to address, and obviously, Sabrina, if it makes sense to jump in as well, please do. Now that systemic racism has been identified as a public health issue, right? How are employers addressing it as far as healthcare and wellness benefits? And I would say even going beyond employers, right? You probably caught the press releases that came out about Las Vegas schools going back to in person because of tragically suicides that were happening due to student mental health. So does anyone want to jump in there in terms of how employers are addressing the public health issue of systemic racism?
Well, I'm on the board of Blue Cross, and not telling tales out of school because they want everybody to know this, that they've done studies of how the quality of health and the access to healthcare varies based on your zip code. Right. And so they also know that people within those zip codes have different demographic conditions, income, education, and all those other things that define who we are in this country. And so what they've been trying to do is to determine how they can create more jobs or work with other affiliated companies to do job creation in some of those zip codes. Because if you have job creation and you can work and you can generate income you can afford healthcare. You don't have to move to a different zip code. You can fix the problem where it lies. And that kind of thing is happening more and more. Once you understand what the problem is, I've heard, racism is a public health crisis. And it is because racism is depriving people of job opportunities and income opportunities, education opportunities. And now you got to pay for your health, and you can't. So the smart companies are recognizing that these are things that they have to do outside of their normal pattern of what they used to do was they found out what zip code you lived in. Some of those companies did, and avoided it. The doctor's offices would move out of those zip codes. The clinics will move out of the zip codes. So rather than do that now, they're trying to work collaboratively with people who can do the kinds of things that people need to better their conditions and to increase their options for healthcare and other things.
Colleen, I know Signet's done a number of things to really advance the well-being of their team members relative to over the last year. Can you share a couple of quick examples that might resonate with folks, whether they're in big or small orgs?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just off the top of my head, one of the things that was really helpful for me to better understand systemic racism was we made ourselves very vulnerable, and we asked our Black colleagues, will you please teach us? And so we host once a quarter what we call Signet Speaks Out. And it's, I happen to be LGBTQ, but I don't know what it's like to be Black. And so these were so healing. And then we got to a place of understanding, like, please just teach me and then tell me how I can be an ally. And so now we have this huge entire company saying, let's all fight, teach us how to fight microaggressions, teach us to help us walk a mile in your shoes, because there's no way we will ever really be able to get it, but you got to teach us and fast, because this shit has got to stop. And then we realized, we're doing okay in diversity, but we can do much better. In certain levels of our ranks, we want to get that moved up faster. And Sabrina, you're exactly right. We don't ever want to hear that there's no pipeline excuse. That's just BS, right? So we launched a mentorship program called Bold. And so everyone that wants to participate in the organization to help specifically with raising our level of diversity, and helping fight systemic racism, promotions and things like that. Our BRG group helped us, our Black Employee Network is called BEN, and they helped us do things like, nonpartisan, but get out the vote. What can we all do? So we closed our stores to make sure that every employee could do that. So it's things like this, and then to the point earlier, making business decisions that can help with really important things that are like pay. And so we do pay equity studies every single year just to make sure, we're doing right by our people, because that's why we work. And so those are a couple of things.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Colleen. To dovetail on what Bruce said earlier about the disparity in zip codes, just to show how prevalent it is, there's a 7-year disparity between people living in 19107 in Center City and people living in 19146 in South Philadelphia. A 7-year disparity in longevity. And that's within, what is that, 2 miles, if that far apart? And so the key is to remove what's called the social determinants of health and really to address those things. And I come out of a healthcare background for the last 15 years and spent a lot of time looking at it. Grocery stores like the ShopRite, Brown ShopRites, that's bringing in healthcare facilities into the grocery stores. That's starting to address it, realizing that people aren't going to go into Center City for healthcare if they've got to pay to park, if they're, worried about, excuse me, I've got children, can I get into Center City, get to my doctor's appointment and get home to the children as well? All those type of things you've got to look at. Are people secure where they live, or are they just trying to address gun violence in their neighborhood? Then they can't focus on health. That's a health issue. Educational issues, alcohol abuse, all those things. And then certainly infant mortality, all those things are social determinants of health that have to be addressed for organizations to move forward. And any employer who doesn't think that they have to look at that at some point, that's not my issue, it's not going to be successful.
Well, that zip code that you talked about was Point Breeze?
Yes, 145 and 146. Yep.
Right, right. And my original zip code was 19123, which was in public housing, in Richard Allen Housing Projects. And those two communities, and we need to understand that those two communities are the most heavily gentrified zip codes in the city also. Correct. So pretty soon, those people won't live there anymore, but we won't know where they are. Right. Because when they get displaced, nobody follows them. So wherever they are, they will have the same healthcare problems, the same employment problems, and they're just being shunted out into other neighborhoods. But more well-to-do people now live in those communities in 19123. My office is actually in 19123 now. Okay. It happens.
It reminds me of a amazing story, and some of you may know this, and I don't know. I'm gonna shortchange some of the details, and I apologize. But there's a former Philadelphia Eagle named Reverend Herb Lusk.
Yeah, we know Herb.
And he had an All-Pro year the year before the Eagles went to the Super Bowl back in 25, 30 years ago. And his faith called him to leave the NFL, and he became the pastor of a church on Broad Street that was in a very turnaround space, right? And Bruce, you could probably do the story way more justice, but I'll just keep going. The bank that the church is attached to leased the church to him, and he became pastor. And over the course of his immersing himself into that work in that community, the bank now leases the property from him, and he has one of the most vibrant communities of faith in the city. The transformation like that is really what we hope that this type of discussion allows for, is more instances where individuals and organizations have moments like Signet has had, where they can show courage and take a stance in a meaningful way that impacts so many employees' lives and customers' lives. The intersection of how a customer experience and how we evaluate our buying patterns is now absolutely being influenced by the employee experience. And the way that everyone's doing their homework is through digital, through social media, right? And doing their homework that way. So there's so much more that we can do as advocates, as allies, as champions, as people that are in positions of influence, whether we're growing in our careers or we're managing that PR team. Go ahead.
Well, Dan, I just want to add that Herb Lusk's church, the first Greater Exodus, before my Catholic church was closed in that community in North Central Philadelphia. It was Our Lady of the Blessed Sacrament. And Herb Lusk's church is now where Our Lady of the Blessed Sacrament was. And we still go up there every now and then for funerals for people who live in the community. But again, the communities are changing all the time, and we've got to be aware of what happens with people in these neighborhoods, because you go and leave for 10 years or so and you won't recognize it at all.
It's the world is and digital accelerates this. The world is consistently changing, and I look at what the children around us have access to and how quickly it informs them and influences them. And so we're very appreciative, and I'm super grateful to Bruce, Colleen, and Sabrina for your time, your perspective, and your insights with this community. And Samantha, I'm going to toss it back over to you to wrap us up on time. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. And thank you to all the panelists, Bruce, Colleen, Sabrina, for just having this open discussion today. I know we can cover so much and there never seems to be enough time. But I do want to share with everyone, all our guests and PPRA members, that the DEI committee is continuing to work on programming for the remainder of the year. And we have some interesting thoughts and interesting ideas coming up that we're hoping that you can all join us for as we continue through the programming year. So the survey, as London has mentioned, has been a great guide for us and a tool for us to figure out how we can really meet the needs of our PPRA members, but also PR professionals across Philadelphia. I saw that we had some student voices here in the chat as well, and that's great to see. And just to know, in knowing that that they're thinking about this and that they're the next step, the future of PR professionals here in Philadelphia. So it's good to see them involved in that way, and we hope that you can continue to stay involved as well as the other guests that participated today. So again, thank you to Dan, Bruce, Colleen, and Sabrina for this discussion. And we look forward to kind of working with you guys more as we continue to figure out how DEI plays a role in our work every day.
Before you guys go off, I know you can't see me, I'm Patricia, but can you take a screenshot of this? That way you guys can, advertise, we would like to put this on our social media. I couldn't log in, and I'm Bruce looking real strange because I just interrupted your meeting.
My wife, excuse me.
And I thought that would be great, a nice screenshot, but for some reason it wouldn't allow me to log in. So that was my little part, sorry.
No problem, Patricia. And, for all the guests here, this webinar was recorded. So we'll be sending out the webinar and the slides and any additional information that comes out of it afterwards. So again, thank you all for participating, and for the guests, stay tuned for more event information and a follow-up to this.
Thank you.
Panelists, I'll ask you to stay on really quickly for that screenshot. All right, 1, 2, 3. Good, thank you all.
Thanks all. I learned so much. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciated the teachings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Amazing.
The chat asked me about a word that I use, carefrontation. So I'm happy to give you more that you could send out. It's a word that I didn't coin, someone shared it with me, but it's, caring enough to bring the issues to the person's attention, but confronting them with care. So
That's awesome. I
but care about the person. So that
love that, Sabrina. It's awesome.
let them learn something as opposed to destroying them.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sabrina, if you can send that over, that would be great.
I'll send it to you to push out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Hey,
great
before we
day.
go,
Yes,
Yeah.
did you guys know that Dan used to be the Hawk at St. Joe's University?
we did. We were talking about it before we started this call.
That's